welcome to the Top Order podcast. You're going to notice someone else on the screen today. We'll come to that in a second. But on today's show, we are going to be having the Black Caps versus England preview. We'll do our ubiquitous explainer. We'll talk the build up to the series, contrasting form for New Zealand and England in their previous series, squad news and selections, bowling attacks, selection questions for the visitors, matchups, and of course, series predictions where we try to get Baldy to come off the fence. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned.
Green one.
There we go. That's what happens when I do it.
There we go. We've used all the noises on the roadcaster there. Well, boys, great to be here to talk more Test cricket, the format of the game that certainly we love to talk about, probably the most, and we'll say probably just so we don't lose about 1 billion viewers and listeners from a white ball perspective. But the eagle-eyed of you will notice that we've got a fifth person on your screens, Jamie Barker, who has been a guest on the podcast several times. He's going to be making his Top Order debut. We're going to send him in first or second drop, I think, today. But Jamie's going to be adding more and more UK content with myself. Now I'm back up in the Northern Hemisphere. But another English perspective on, let's be honest, a podcast that was being dominated far too much from the Antipodes. Welcome, Jamie, to the Top Order podcast.
Thanks all. Thanks, Binksy. Yeah, absolutely delighted to be joining this elite group of individuals. I'm hoping I can make some sort of contribution over the forthcoming episodes and so forth. But yeah, genuinely delighted to bring a bit of Northern Hemisphere balance. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well, look, I'm sure we'll come into Jamie's numerous credentials as we come through the podcast. He's already getting grief, I believe, in the Barker household for talking a bit too loudly this Sunday morning. So, hopefully, as we approach 8 o'clock UK time, and that'll go away if the cartoons are on Jamie or the coffee machine wears into action. Let's start, though, with our ubiquitous explainer. So we've got the Black Caps versus England. It seems only yesterday that the English were in New Zealand, that fantastic test match in Wellington, a bit of drama at the end, and a Mount Maunganui run feast, which was viewed in person by the Top Order, or the majority of the Top Order. We travelled down for that particular test match. We had a few beverages, bought some marmalade, and watched 4 or 5 days of the test match. But do we want to do a quick explainer of dates and venues and from a New Zealand perspective, the World Test Championship points that are on the line and what that means for the permutations? I'm guessing I'm handing over to either Stuart or Baldy for this.
Yeah, well, Baldy's given me the lead for this. I'm not sure why. Maybe he hasn't done his notes on his explainer, but either way, it's I will echo the sentiments from here in New Zealand, Jamie. Great to have you on board, and looking forward to this series. Obviously, a great start for us now to have 2 English and two Kiwis here, and then 1 neutral. So it's a good start for us for this particular series.
It's not a neutral. It's Australian.
Yeah, well, good point. And also when New Zealand is doing well, we get the we. It's a we podcast, which I do like. I encourage that behaviour. So yeah, that's
When's the first test, Stuart?
So the first test starts on Thursday, on the 28th of November, Hagley Oval. We'll get into a bit more about the squads and things, but certainly what we know from Hagley in the past, it's usually been a deck where New Zealand picks 4 seamers, goes from there, and you sort of expect to win the toss, bowl first, and hopefully do the business. Second test is only 8 days later at the Basin Reserve, Friday the 6th of December. And then the third test is at Seddon Park in Hamilton, another 8 days later on the 14th of December. So if my maths is correct, we've got 3 tests in a maximum of 21 day span. So it's a very, very quick turnaround in terms of the games that we're sort of looking towards. And 3 tests, only a couple of days between each one if they do go 5 days, which we don't often see anymore. But, even still, I think it's going to be all jam-packed due to the schedule of, probably of the holidays, but also the fact that England's just been away, so they couldn't get here sooner. So, very, very jam-packed schedule. But 3 tests coming up. On the World Test Championship stuff, I almost don't want to go into it because the permutations are just so wide. We've got Sri Lanka and South Africa starting a series on Wednesday, and that has huge ramifications. We've obviously got Australia, India going on. Currently, as we're recording this podcast, we'll do a review of that first test once that game is finished. But, there's so many permutations. I guess from a New Zealand point of view, we just we probably need to win 3-0 and hope that results go our way. So, we'll just see how it goes. And as the test series moves on, we can start thinking more about what actually we need to do to sort of position ourselves if things go well.
Fantastic. Look, should we come on and talk a little bit, I guess, about the build-up to the series? England have just completed what looks like on paper a fantastically close warm-up game, although it did have a little bit of a sort of benefit match feel in terms of the way that the scorecards read. I think Ben Stokes, for example, didn't bat in the first innings and then came out and batted in the middle order in the second innings. So it was obviously getting overs and a bit of time in the middle. No surprises, I guess, from an England perspective that they looked to try and score, a million runs and over throughout the course of the game. But came down to the wire, that warm-up game. I don't know how much that's going to tell us, I guess, about this. But from a build-up perspective, we've got that contrasting form for New Zealand. Let's mention it again, winning 3-0 in India as their tune-up, and England, in contrast, performed okay at home this summer. 5 Test matches out of 6 in the win column. But struggle definitely in Pakistan. But as we've often talked about, spin probably not likely to play a massive part in this series. But I guess over to Stu and Raj to talk about that contrasting form from a New Zealand perspective, and then maybe if we come to Jamie to talk about the England build-up.
Yeah, Raj, what do you think? Like, I've been trying to rack my brain around, like, how much do we actually take from the India series in terms of, like, moving now to back home in England? Because, when I look at it, I think the confidence is huge, and I don't think should be underestimated at all. I think that is massive that we've gone over there and won 3-0. But apart from that, what else can we actually transition into our players going home in completely different conditions?
It's interesting because I actually want to look even further back to the sort of Sri Lankan series as well. And if I were to sort of look at both series, I think the sort of true reflection is actually somewhere in the middle. Obviously, in Sri Lanka, we played incredibly poorly.
Do you think so? I thought we actually played better than the results. Maybe,
we dropped a lot of catches.
Yes, that second test was horrendous.
I think we executed poorly on a lot of things that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Probably more so on the sort of batting and fielding side of the ledger. There were some good things, but also, our bowling was our shining light, but everyone kept dropping catches all over the spot. Daryl Mitchell couldn't catch a cold in that series, but he's much better in India. And I think that's the difference. In India, we had plans. We had arguably the best of the conditions, but we still executed, and that's what it came down to, the quality of execution, both with bat, ball, and I guess sort of supporting in the field as well. I'm sure that we have plans for England and what we're going to do.
How sure are you about that?
I'm sure we have plans for how we're going to deal with England. I think most important of those will be on the bowling side of things. I think it's how we sort of slow down that charging top order and how we deal with someone like Joe Root. I mean, he is a world-class batsman. We know that. He averages 52.5 in New Zealand. We're going to have some plans around that. The pitches in New Zealand are actually looking really good. A lot of runs being scored on the domestic circuit. That's how I think that they're somewhere in the middle. I think that we were great at executing over in India. Maybe India had their eye on something else. I don't know. But I think that we will have a little come down to earth moment. But I'm still fairly positive for this series.
And I mean, to add one tiny thing before we throw to you, Jamie, on England, because completely, different in terms of again in Pakistan, scored 800 one week, then the next couple of weeks couldn't buy a run on those turning tracks. But I think for New Zealand, the one thing I think they will take from that series, aside from the confidence, is that they went and actually won those big moments. because it's been the thing that had been missing from their side over the past 12 months. That, and that, I even look back to that Australia series, Baldy, that Christchurch test in particular that we were at, they had moments to win that game. They got in positions where it was a scenario where, okay, we win this next hour and we've won the test, and they couldn't execute. They couldn't quite grapple them. But in India, they won all of them. Every time it was the match was there to be won, they went and did that. So that's the thing that I think they go, okay, cool. Now we feel like we can do that again. So yeah, I hope, obviously hope from a New Zealand point of view that sticks. Over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks all. Yeah, I think you can't underestimate. I think winning 3-0 in India. Like very rarely does that happen. I think from a psych perspective, the confidence that teams will draw from that, I think that is huge. It's almost like winning a World Cup, winning an Olympic medal. It is going to be massive. And I think, going into the Test series, if we use that as a predictor, New Zealand should be feeling more confident probably than England because of that recent success. We know recent success will always have the biggest bearing on confidence of what we do next. So if we use that as a model, then the Kiwis should be feeling super good about what's going to happen. I think it's interesting what you said there, Raj, about the pitch conditions. If the wickets are looking good, whose favour does that play in? Does that fall into England's hands a little bit more if they are good decks? If it does enable them to sort of charge and tee off early, arguably England probably struggle a little bit more in terms of their way of playing when it does move around, when there is a bit more grass on it perhaps. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. I think the way England have tried to approach stuff, though, arguably maybe taking outcome away from it. We spoke about the Bazball revolution to the nth degree. I think really where they try to get to is thinking about processes. So actually some of the stuff around conditions and form and previous experience perhaps kind of goes out the window a little bit, maybe in terms of how they're trying to do stuff. But they're human beings at the end of the day, and these factors will have some bearing on their approach in terms of going into these matches. So yeah, it's going to be a real fascinating matchup, I think. Like you say, England kind of highs and lows in Pakistan, 800 one week, skittled the next. Bet that's kind of how they want to clearly live and breathe their cricket. So exciting to watch, but a little bit like Forrest Gump. You never know, life's a life, box of chocolates. You're not sure quite what you're going to get, perhaps. So but yeah, I don't know if that helps at all. I'll pass over to Binksy for his northern hemisphere perspectives as well, I guess.
I'll give you a lead in, Binksy. Just two questions from me, going off what Jamie said there about confidence. How do you think the Pakistan series has affected Bazball in that model of attacking cricket? And two, do you think England have any advantage being led by two great New Zealanders playing in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I'm sure to take your second question first, Raj, I think a few bottles of Pinot Noir and you're going to forget almost everything that happened the night before. So, they've got Baz McCullum in that seat. So, jokes aside, I think, the familiarity I think that he will have brought to this. They've been down in Queenstown, which is one of his favourite haunts in New Zealand. He'll have been trying to get the guys to be like goldfish and forget what's happened in the very, very recent past. And probably not even focus too much on the future. They've talked a hell of a lot about just focusing on the here and now. I think to your first question, Raj, a lot of it I think is going to come down to the surfaces that we play on and the selections that we have. And I guess the difference that you would have in New Zealand versus anywhere else in the world, if England were going to play a series now in Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Bangladesh, what you were going to get. You were going to get a team stacked with spinners as your opposition, and probably pitches that are going to have that lateral movement from day one. Really, really difficult for you guys to do that. We've talked a hell of a lot that someone like Ajaz Patel, who's taken a 10 for, taken 100 wickets overseas or whatever it is, hasn't yet got a wicket in New Zealand and is unlikely to, because he's probably not going to get a bowl in New Zealand. So very, very unlikely that you can find enough industrial fans and heaters to kind of get those Mount Maunganui and Hagley pitches in a stage where they're absolutely ragging turners. So I think it is going to come down a hell of a lot to that first game in Hagley. We've often looked at Hagley and kind of gone, oh my goodness, particularly on TV, that's going to seem all over the shop due to, the old school mentality of it looks a bit green. But typically when it's looked a bit green, it meant it's held together pretty well and been decent for batting and relatively placid. So I think that's probably going to be the thing that I think dictates largely where this series goes, rather than form from an England perspective. I'll leave you guys to talk about whether form from a New Zealand perspective plays that bigger part. But I think England have done pretty well at trying to forget about form and as Jamie said, to focus on process. And look, I don't know all the ramifications of that. I'm a simple man and a simple cricketer, so that doesn't compute with me. But I certainly can't forget that I am terrible at playing a ball that's bowled at my stumps, for example, or every time a nick comes, it's going to hit the floor. But I think it's going to come down to those pitches and conditions as the largest factor, certainly for the first Test match.
And
there's some irrational beliefs that you have there, Binksy, that I might be able to help you with off
mate,
podcast.
This isn't a vehicle for you to get some consultancy work. Let's hear from Baldy. I think you were going to jump in, Michael.
Sorry, Baldy.
Yeah, or I was going to ask Baldy, sort of introduce him, because I think we'll move on to the squads probably, and I'm interested to see what you think of the two squads and if anything stands out, because I think we were talking just before, New Zealand has, at least for the first Test, not selected a specialist spinner. You can say that we've got Ravindra and Phillips in there as well, to be that spin option and bowl some overs probably. England, on the other hand, have got three of them in there. They've brought three of them over, the same three that that they took to Pakistan. So I don't know if they are expecting more spin or they just wanted to keep the same group together. That's often a thing that McCullum likes to do, sort of keep the same players in and around the squad. So perhaps it's as simple as that. But does anything stand out to you and maybe some key selection questions for each side?
A couple of key selection questions for me from a New Zealand perspective are really what that pace attack is going to look like. If New Zealand have already made the decision that they're not going to select a frontline spinner, at least for the first Test, then it looks like they'll probably go in with Phillips batting at 7, you would imagine, as he has batted in that position on a number of occasions for New Zealand over the recent series, and then 4 pace bowlers. So the makeup of the pace battery with Nathan Smith, Will O'Rourke, Tim Southee, and then also Jacob Duffy, 3 out of those guys are going to support Matt Henry, who now becomes the leader of that New Zealand attack going forward. So the makeup of that batting lineup, sort of 6, 7, 8, becomes really, really interesting. And I wonder if Nathan Smith starts to firm in the selector's mindset because of the lack of runs they're getting from Tom Blundell batting at number 6. So all of those are factors that I think will play into the consideration. I like the look of New Zealand 1 through 5, though. I think, if you have a look at that side now with Kane Williamson, hopefully touch wood, back for the remainder of that Test series or the remainder of the summer, I really, really like the way that batting lineup shapes up 1 through 5. My question is, what are we going to do about Blundell and what are we going to do about Phillips at that 6-7 position? Because that really is the selection question for me. Do you elevate Phillips to number 6 and give him more of a role, more responsibility against that England attack and go, you know what? This guy could win us a Test match off his own bat in the space of 45 minutes to an hour or so. And I don't think Blundell in his current form can win you a Test match. He might be able to save you one, but I don't think he's got that skill set to win you a Test match in his current form, whereas I think Phillips has. And if you're going to fight fire with a little bit of fire, Phillips is the trump card that I think New Zealand need to be more strongly confident that they can play.
I find that quite a strange position to come from when you're talking about picking an all-rounder to cover for potentially lack of runs for someone in the top 6.
It's a problem.
We've done the Tom Blundell questions to death. But what did you think that he would get another run? I think you did.
Yeah, look, I think he will. And Gary Stead came out and said after the series that after the 2 away series that we've just had that he's the best keeper in New Zealand. I mean, the thing for New Zealand, we've got these 3 tests, and then it's a huge gap before we play Test cricket again. I think Gary Stead's contract elapses, and there's been no word really on whether he's going to be renewed, whether there's going to be a new coach. So we don't really know what's going to happen. I don't think we play Test cricket again until I think it's July, August. We go to Zimbabwe for a couple of tests. You know, if you're thinking long term, Tom Blundell's 34, maybe going to Zimbabwe to play a couple of tests is the perfect place to sort of blood a new keeper. We've obviously just put Mitch Hay into the one-day side. A lot of people are talking about him. He had a really great year last year. Max Chew, actually, who's also 24, same age as Mitch Hay, has made a really good start to the domestic summer here. So there are a couple of contenders now, you know, pushing for his spot. But I think we always thought he will get this series. I mean, it's not that long ago. Binksy said it's not that long. It doesn't feel like that long ago since, you know, England was last here. Blundell scored a fantastic 100 at the Mount when we were watching that game, and then he scored 90 in the game in the second innings when we followed on and you know, won that test by 1 run. So, you know, I agree with you. He doesn't look like scoring those runs now. You know, he looks in terrible form. But, you know, I suppose, you know, I don't know, he did just score 60 in he played Plunket Shield. He got 60 runs. You know, I think obviously that will feel good after struggling a little bit. He's got this series, but it's a huge series for him because I think if he doesn't perform, then there are going to be huge question marks about his spot. On the bowling side, I will just say before I throw it to England, because Jamie's got some breaking news for us that landed just before the podcast, but I will say, you know, Duffy and Smith being in the squad means we will get one debut, which is exciting. And I think either of them on Plunket Shield form, they've been probably the last 3 seasons, those two have been really pushing for spots. They've been, you know, if not the top 2, they've been very close to the top 2 for all that time. So I think either one of them that gets their opportunity will deserve it. People who are sort of not familiar with either bowler, Duffy's played a few ODIs and T20s, so, you know, you probably have seen him, taller bowler. They're both in the 130 to 140 kind of range. Yeah, Nathan Smith probably maybe a bit skiddier, but, you know, might hit the deck a bit harder. Duffy will run in, and he's been done a really honest job for New Zealand. So, yeah, I think there's those decisions to make, and then Santner comes in for the second and third test, and, yeah, we'll probably cover those a bit later, but at least gives a spin option.
Quick question for you, Lippy, maybe. Have New Zealand named this squad for all 3 games, or have they hedged their bets with this is the first test squad?
They've said first test squad, and then Santner comes in and joins it for the second and third test.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You mentioned some breaking news. So, yeah, Jamie, I don't know whether I want to come to you for that. Certainly don't come to me for it because I'm not aware of it.
Well, no, it sounds like I'm working for MI5 or something in terms of the breaking news, but generally ripped this off BBC Sport this morning when I woke up. But it looks like, Jordan Cox is going to be out of the series with a broken thumb sustained in the Prime Minister's game. So from what we can discern, it kind of looks like Ollie Pope will step up with the gloves, looking like probably no replacement will be brought in at this point. So yeah, that's an interesting sort of shift in dynamics, I guess, because I think England would obviously looking to give Cox his debut, and with a view maybe to the Ashes sort of a year out, possibly being sort of maybe a key factor within that squad. So kind of hampering plans a little bit there. And I think just coming back to one of the earlier points as well, that, you know, about kind of this paradox, I guess, that it exists a little bit with England. So in one breath, it's about focusing on the now, but equally, there's a lot of momentum, a lot of narrative now about focusing on the Ashes 2025, and already, you know, certainly at Loughborough, the National Centre, there's been a lot of prep done on over the last few months around outdoor wickets, training in a tent with heaters on, but really trying to get these wickets hard and fast with a view to prepare for the Ashes. So kind of like, that's really good long-term planning, but equally you can't take the eye off what's happening in the here and now. So you've got to have those plans. It's like planning for a 4-year Olympic cycle, but equally you've got to deliver now to build that form, to build those plans. So it's going to be interesting kind of how this plays out. And already I think the media here are, yeah, you know, this is kind of, this series maybe seen as a bit of a precursor to what's going to happen a year out, which I think is always dangerous. It's kind of like, yeah, you can't take this lightly. This is a test series. It's really important. It's going to be competitive, and it's going to be tough. So yeah. I don't know what you think about that. Ollie Pope stepping in, and yeah.
Let me jump in here, because that almost for me solves a problem for England as far as selection is concerned, because when I was looking at their squad and how it comes together and looking at some of the ways that they've sort of constructed their side in the past, sometimes they go with Chris Wokes at 7 and play 5 genuine bowlers. Now it looks like it might be a little bit easier for them to do that. It means that Ollie Pope gets to keep his spot. I had him crossed out if England played 5 bowlers in their squad. But then Binksy and Jamie, what happens to Pope then? Does he then bat at 3, or does he slide down to bat at 5 or 6 in the order to wear the gloves? And then if so, who then slots up to bat at 3? Is it Stokes? Is it Brook? Because you would think that Joe Root would keep his spot at 4.
Do you remember what Michael Vaughan, your mate, was saying the other day about sharing the gloves around? Maybe they'll do it session by session.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it's interesting. The only prep that I've done for this podcast is to put together my thoughts on Jordan Cox keeping wicket as the 19th choice wicketkeeper in England, and now we're down to the 20th choice. So, look, I think what this creates for England is an opportunity for Pope to actually shuffle down the order. I think that the batting at 3 and keeping wicket. I think is probably not sustainable in the long term. And when I say long term, I mean for this series, if they do decide to give him the gloves for the rest of the series. It looks like, Jamie, that they might have added to the breaking news on that BBC story that they look like they're going to call up a replacement. Not yet clear who that might be, whether it's, a return of the prodigal Yorkshire son, Johnny Bairstow, or whether they, skip a couple of generations and look at someone like a Phil Salt. Or a quick text to Joss Butler, Ashes ? In the way that they did for Moeen Ali in that last series. Look, slightly joking when I say that. But look, I think it gives an opportunity to maybe put him down to number 6 and see if that helps him, which does kick a can down the road to create a problem for, who is going to bat at 3. Because I think, as Baldy alluded to, I don't think Joe Root's going to, stick his hand up. And I think it would be stupid for England to do that, given the form that he's been in, at number 4. But I think in more simple terms, I think that this actually, the Cox selection in the first place, and the fact that they're happy to go with Pope, and part of that will be it's going to be pretty tough to fly someone in for a test match starting middle of next week and get them acclimatised, is they probably kind of thought, do you know what, wickets in New Zealand tend to be quite placid. You're going to stand back for a long periods of it. New Zealand don't pick a spinner. A frontline spinner, shall we say. So, there aren't going to be a lot of overs up to the stumps. I expect England will play Bashir because I think they want to pump his tyres up, because I think they do want him to go to Australia. And I think they see him as the guy that is going to be the spinner come, whether it's the Perth Stadium or Brisbane or wherever Australia try to ambush us first in Australia in a year's time. That they will want Shoaib Bashir in that team. But I can't see there being too much of an issue with a guy who's got a pair of gloves in his bag keeping wicket in this series. It doesn't wobble about a hell of a lot in New Zealand. Look, reserve the right when he puts down a couple of goobers to have a conversation about picking your best keeper again. But I don't think that's going to be something that's going to be dominating too many of the back pages, other than the Ben Folks Times, which published in a small Essex village, I believe. But yeah,
does it shift? Does it shift how Pope plays at all? If you go from 3 to 6, does he all of a sudden, is it saying to him, be freer, be freer than he is at 3, or
can he be more fresh?
Can he? Yes.
Can he be more frenetic at 6 than he has been at 3? I don't know.
What do you guys make of picking the 3 spinners? That's the medium-sized elephant in the room, I guess. Is it a team dynamics thing? What is the reason, you reckon, for the picking 3 spinners?
Well, Jamie can come with a serious bit. I think they've got round the world tickets, and essentially they're going to go Vegas on the way back. It's strange. I think other than that sort of cohesion piece, but yeah, Jamie, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, or Baldy?
Yeah, I suppose the only bit I'd add, maybe it's around travelling with the same group of people. There's familiarity. They're building a group identity. You spoke about sense of we-ness at the start of the podcast, and I guess that's kind of probably what Baz is created there. It does seem a strange one, unless hopefully we're not going back to the Ashley Giles role of a spinner. Like the tying of one end up and bowling darts outside leg stump. I don't think it's that. But yeah, you do sort of wonder what roles they're going to have, unless it's just increasing understanding of different conditions. Like kind of just getting them to play in the nets or be around those environments just to increase the knowledge. And we often talk a lot about sport intelligence, and you can't get that if you probably play in club cricket somewhere else. You're only going to get that if you're in and around the environment. So I think that there are a number of benefits of taking players along, even if they're not playing. They're still going to be in the nets. They're still going to be kind of around and picking up information, particularly if they're young, inexperienced players. It's only going to help them further down the track. People would argue it's probably quite an expensive holiday for some of them, but if we look at maybe some of the benefits of that, maybe it outweighs that, I think. But yeah, I don't know. It is a strange one, isn't it? Given the debate we've had and conversation we've had around pitch conditions and typically what New Zealand will go into these matches with, it's going to be predominantly seam and pace. It's not going to be spin. So
yeah. And I guess the other quick point there as well is when you have your standing wicketkeeper go down with a broken thumb on the day before, or the days before a game, and you've not picked a second keeper, a genuine keeper, but you've got three spinners in a series where you're likely to play one, if not none. It does seem a little bit odd that they didn't sort of hedge their bets with the airfares a little bit differently in terms of the makeup of that squad. Baldy, I'm interested
Can I just quickly get your point of view while we're talking about the bowling on that bowling attack? Because, on the seamers especially, I suppose, because I looked at that last series that New Zealand played, which, again, wasn't that long ago. The seam attack then was Anderson, Broad, Robinson. None of those guys are there now, So, and we've talked a little bit about their building to the future. Now it's, Wokes, Atkinson, Cass, Potts, Ollie Stone is there. Are you feeling that this is now shaping into a good attack? You don't necessarily even have to talk about this series. How are you feeling about the attack in general and how it's kind of coming together? Because those guys, it seems like, even if we throw Wood in there and in the players that aren't here and that were around the squad last time, it felt like they all sort of had different roles that they played in that attack. And, are we sort of seeing that from an England squad?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing is that, they've obviously placed what I think is a relatively short-term bet on Chris Wokes to lead that young attack for a short period of time. And I think they've kind of probably thought long and hard about his record with the Kookaburra and whether or not him going to New Zealand, would be a good plan. But it looks for me as they are going to entrust that new ball with him and that sort of leader of the attack. I expect, from what I've seen so far, and I don't want to sort of overhype a young guy, but I've been really impressed with Gus Atkinson. I think he's got the tools to play all around the world. I think, we can use all the cliches. He bowls a heavy ball, he hits the right length. He asks questions in that corridor and all that kind of jazz. But look, he looks as strong as an ox and very, very skillful. And then I think, look, we've talked about it a hell of a lot. England want to get pace into that lineup. You look at the selections of Ollie Stone, Bryden Carse, hopefully Jofra will be back, Mark Wood when he's fit. That's where they want to go. And then I think even if you just look at this last little warm-up game, there was pretty much a bowl off between Shoaib Bashir and Jack Leach, particularly in that second innings of that game where they both bowled a lot of overs, and partly that would have been to save the seamers, I think, and they would have gone, we want these guys to bowl 7 overs or 9 overs or whatever it is from a workload management perspective. But yeah, that's the way that attack I think is going to shape up. But I think with the sheer amount of cricket that's being played at the moment, you can't necessarily say that's going to be England's first choice attack fit for the Ashes. That they really want to get the cotton wool out and try and make sure they've got probably Wood, Ollie Stone, and Jofra Archer all on the plane. And then I think you've got, I think Bryden Carse and Gus Atkinson probably are a similar type of bowler. The question mark for me is, who is that wily old seamer? Who is the experienced person that you take? And I'd be really interested to get, some other views on Ollie Robinson, because the guy averages 21 or something like that in Test cricket. He's got a lot of talent. Now, he bowled, an absolute pile of dross on that Ashes tour. When we look at the speeds, particularly last time, he was down to 118 kilometres, which someone else can do the imperial calculation. I've not quite got my UK miles an hour hat back on yet. But that's going to be a question for me. And then the other thing, I wanted to ask Baldy, this question, which is around Rehan Ahmed, young leg spinner, what he's feeling on a tour where, look, it's highly unlikely that he's going to play. Jamie mentioned being around the team and getting used to the conditions, but Baldy, what do you think is going through a 20-year-old leg spinner's head that he's almost definitely not going to play, and what's that doing to his mentality?
You would think he's probably not going to play, but I think you only have to look as far as Jacob Bethel's recent article on ESPN Cricinfo, where he was interviewed by the Cricinfo team about his role in the England setup as a young player, not a lot of first-class experience behind him, thrust into the England setup because they see potential in him, and they've showed that with Josh Hull, they've showed that with Bashir, they've showed it with Rehan Ahmed, they've showed it with a number of young players who haven't quite knocked the door down in terms of their first-class experience, but show enough potential and enough promise that McCullum and Stokes want them in that England setup. And I think what Rehan Ahmed will get from this England tour is continued experience and learning from, as Jamie said, those higher level thought processes around the game of cricket. You're not going to get that necessarily bowling in English conditions. What you're going to get is that exposure to the likes of Joe Root and Stokes and McCullum and all those experienced campaigners that are able to take them around the world and show them fantastic golf courses, show them fantastic entertainment, but also, don't underestimate the value of just picking up and learning what it's like to be in that environment, because there is no substitute for being in an international side to learn about the international game. But also, by the same token, there's no substitute as a leg spinner for bowling lots and lots of overs. So I think the only thing that will get Rehan Ahmed out of continued success is if he's not continuing to bowl a lot of overs. So he's got to maximise his net workload. He's got to maximise any chance he can get in front of any of those spinners that he goes around the world. If he's going to Pakistan, he needs to be getting in front of Mushtaq Ahmed and learning from him. He needs to be getting in front of, Indian spinner X, New Zealand spinner Y, etc., etc. So those are the experiences that he needs to glean, because while he's doing this all around the world stuff and learning from those great minds in the setup, he's not getting overs necessarily in match situations. He's not getting a lot of overs in game situations at the county level, and he needs to balance his international touring with real world-class experience bowling at batsmen in real games.
Do we want to move now to I guess, the key matchups that are going to decide this series, according to us? I mean, Raj, we haven't come to you for a little while. What do you think is going to be key for New Zealand in actually getting these wins on the board?
So I guess sort of coming back to what I said earlier around pitches look to be okay to bat on at this time of year for New Zealand. There is runs. I don't think runs will be at a premium, but in saying that, I don't think wickets will be at a premium either. New Zealand's always that kind of place that if you bowl well with the new ball and don't allow a platform to be set for the sort of middle order, you'll put yourself in sort of good stead. So I think that it's going to come down to me, the English top three versus the new ball. If New Zealand want to sort of win this series, they need to get to Root and Stokes with a fresh ball. If we allow the openers and whoever's at number three to go out there and score quickly and take the game away. The problem is they take the game away from you right at the top, and then you have to deal with Roots and Stokes. If we can get through that sort of top three before heading into that middle order, I think that's where we're going to sort of get our inroads into the series and win games. So that's the big matchup for me.
The opening pairs is exactly what I've got on my sheet, because as exactly what you said in terms of Duckett and Crawley, they terrify me in terms of the speed that they go at. And, and we saw that in the Mount last year. They just get on a roll, and it's really, really hard. New Zealand in particular, in both series that we played against England since McCullum has taken over, when England get on a roll, we found it really, really hard. And then it means that Root and Brook come in with even more freedom than they normally have to just be able to go nuts. And on the opposite side of that, I think it's a massive series as well for Conway and Latham. When we talked about the squads, we didn't talk about the fact that I don't think Will Young's going to be picked. He's just gone and been the player of the series in India. But I don't, I think with Kane coming back, I don't think there's a spot for him in that top 6. I think all the others have the money in the bank at least to at least start the series, with Conway and Latham. But, then you look at looked at their numbers since just for 2024. Latham's averaging 25, hasn't got 100. Conway is averaging about the same, hasn't got 100. And that's, 7 tests, 9 tests. We've been talking about them struggling a little bit for a while, I think. And, they, even in that India series, they made important contributions at times, but they didn't even really make them together. It was often one would get out, the other one would stick in, have a bit of time together. I think there must be another time, but I think back, the last time I can think that they actually built a really strong partnership together was that partnership that they put together against England in that Wellington second innings when they scored 149, and then suddenly that sets the platform for everything else that we do with the likes of Phillips, Mitchell, the same kind of players that can come in and play freely and do the things that we all associate with that England middle order. The New Zealand middle order used to work like that. That's sort of Kane and Ross would bat for a long period of time, and then, those other guys would come in and then, get away and put the icing on the cake, I guess, but we haven't been able to do that because of our top orders been struggling. So, yeah, that's where I see it, Binksy and Jamie.
Binksy?
Yeah, I think from a matchups perspective, I just don't think England think about it that way. I think they think about whoever is out there is putting pressure on whoever the matchup is, in the way that individual wants to do it. But I think if I look at your points, and I think where England can, to use your phrase, Lippy, get on a roll, it is going to be at the top of the order. And Crawley and Duckett, whisper it pretty quietly. I don't think England have had an opening lineup, this good since Cook and Strauss, and that was a very, very different proposition in terms of the way they went about their business. I think when we look back at Ben Duckett coming in after 7-8 years after he's making his debut, I think in Bangladesh and India, where he got found out a little bit, he's got to be averaging close to mid-40s. It wasn't that long ago, boys. We were at the Mount Maunganui nets, I think, watching Crawley really agonise over his technique. He was really struggling. The knives are out, certainly in the English media, for him, a year or so ago, and now look where he is. He's inked into that team sheet and that modus operandi that England have. So I think that's really, really important. But I don't think the England guys will be thinking necessarily against specific matchups. But Jamie's been closer to professional cricket dressing rooms than me. He might have a different view.
I think you're spot on. I also think as well they're a multi-dimensional opening partnership as well. I think there is this perception they are kind of just attack, but actually they're very cute as well in terms of Duckett in particular, how he's able to score 360. He's very, very clever in working the runs down to third man and kind of hitting all around. So I think it isn't just a go out there and tee off. I think probably it was a little bit early in the sort of the development of Bazball, but I think now it's sort of a refined method. I support what you say. I think they just, who's out there, what's happening, and kind of like, okay, it's your opportunity to take this situation down. I think they do pay lip service a little bit to the matchups, but I think it is very much what's the context, what does the situation need? Okay, analyse it, respond, but always kind of maybe see it as an opportunity. And I think that feeds into a lot of probably what I kind of see as well in terms of some of the work we would do. It's around viewing situations as opportunities rather than threats. And I think, England teams, we've spoken about this before, but historically, you might get a series or you might get a test, and therefore think of the implications that has for you as an individual. You go in your shell, you go safe. Whereas now, players have a year, 2 years, going to have multiple series, multiple opportunities. It takes the shackles off. It enables them to be their truer selves. So I think you see, and not just England, you see that generally in a lot of the Test nations now. So I think, some of those things are important. I think as well, just going back to the bowling attack, just quickly, I think, it is important, isn't it? Now it's a squad affair. It's not your Broad, Anderson, and that's it. It is three from seven, three from six, and they'll rotate because they have to, because of the schedule being so constrained, being so tight, and so so busy.
Yeah, and Jimmy Anderson on the field in this game as well. So I'm sure he's got the bowling boots in the bag.
Well, he can bowl the Bob spin, can't he? Apparently, so.
Well, he'll have his eyes on the auction tonight, the IPL auction. That'll be Jimmy will be up late tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Queenstown casino, hoping two of his bets come in probably. But you mentioned that, Stewie. We'll obviously cover the IPL auction aftermath probably middle of the week, won't we, on the podcast? So do watch out for that in your feeds. Just before we move away from matchups, Baldy, interesting to get your response, I think, to one of Jamie's earlier points around England's preparation coming into this series, replicating Australian conditions already, and what are you taking away from this from an England perspective in terms of the way that they're preparing? Almost, look, I'll say this, I don't mean it in exactly this way, but it always seems as if England are treating series as warm-ups for the Ashes or warm-ups for an India series. But what's the Australian take on that? Would you be seeing them just not worrying about the Ashes this far out, or do you think it's natural that's in the thinking?
I think it's natural that it's in the thinking, but I don't think England will be getting anywhere ahead of themselves in terms of this 3-test series, because they can still make the World Test Championship final, I think.
I think they're
done. Are they done?
I think they're done.
Mathematically they can still make it. They've got to win 3-0. Other things have got to go their way. But, you don't have to give odds to Brendan McCullum. All you've got to give him is a little bit of a chance, right? He's the Lloyd Christmas of the cricketing world. In terms of that preparation for the Ashes, I think this is an important series for Carson Potts. I think, Wokes and Atkinson are probably on the plane to Australia. Carson Potts might be on the plane to Australia, depending on the availability of Mark Wood, Ollie Stone, Jofra Archer et al. And you even throw Hull and Little into that mix as well. There's lots of seamers that are going to be in contention for being on that plane to Australia. So I think it's an important series for those guys as well. I think Bashir has got his nose in front. I think he's the best of the spinners that we have seen so far that can exploit the bounce conditions that he's likely to get in Australia and Brisbane and Perth at least. So I think he's a good option for New Zealand in this tour to keep him in that radar, keep him in that space looking forward. But England, they're not the kind of side, I don't think, that get lost in the far distant stuff and don't keep their feet on the ground. I think McCullum and Stokes have got these guys grounded pretty well, even though they might be thinking about planning for the future. The focus in this series will be on the here and now. So I don't think there'll be too much written into or thought about in terms of that Australian preparation. But I'm interested to see what Carson Potts can do in this tour.
And you just said spin about Bashir. I will say I think that there's a very good chance that that spin plays a part, at least at the Basin. And because, last series here, we saw Nathan Lyon take 5, or I think he might have taken 10 in that game. He dominated that test. I'm pretty sure he got man of the match. Maybe I'm misremembering, but he certainly had New Zealand all in trouble. And Glenn Phillips took 5 as well, didn't he? So, spin played a much bigger factor in that test than we thought it would. Seddon Park has been known in recent years for being one of the pitches where it does turn a little bit. And so, New Zealand has brought in Mitch Santner for the second and third test. So, I think that spin can play a part, as much as we have talked about the seam attack, as much as I think that seam will still probably determine, at least, like you said, where some of these players are coming in and being able to assert their authority on the innings from a batting point of view. I do think spin will play a factor in the series.
Yeah. Well, as a breaking news podcast, I just do want to jump in. Baldy made a point there around Little potentially being on the plane for England. So Ireland fans, rest assured, we don't think Josh Little is about to jump ship. I think you were talking about Josh Tong, weren't you, Baldy, potentially for that?
Yes, I got the Joshes confused. Yes, Tongue, not Little.
I just didn't want our Associate Nation fans, scouring the
They're
internet.
a Test Nation, mate. You're insulting them already.
Yeah, okay, very, fair enough. Okay, I've insulted them, and so has Michael. We're almost even. Right, let's come on to predictions. And the beautiful thing about 5 people on the podcast is, as long as we can get Baldy to give a straight answer, we should have a decision across the podcast as to who's going to win the series. We can't tie it to each. I'm going to come to probably you first, Stu, with predictions, and then feel free to jump in, whoever has got their numbers after that.
I did find this quite a hard one to predict because of the two sides coming basically from completely foreign conditions. It's going to be completely different than what we saw in Pakistan and in India. But I do think that the confidence that New Zealand's taken, the fact that they are starting to win those big moments, at least in that India series. I wouldn't be a New Zealander if I didn't predict us to win this series. So I do think that we win. I do think it's a tight series. I'm going to go 2-1 New Zealand. Who knows about the weather here in New Zealand? We get rain every second day here in Auckland. So you wouldn't be brave to predict a test that gets affected by weather. But with the way that tests are playing by now, usually we do get results. So it's 2-1 for me.
Okay, well, good. I'd like to reach back into a sort of bag of sayings. I think a lot's going to be determined by how each team plays in this series. New Zealand, I've also picked New Zealand to win. I think that they'll win 2-1 with a deciding test match.
Oh, exciting.
So one each going into the third, with New Zealand ultimately being triumphant.
Yep.
Pass over to you, Baldy.
Look, I think England have a distinct advantage in the top order. I think England have a slight advantage in the middle order, and I think England have a slight advantage if you look at the bowling attacks overall. But games aren't played on paper, and New Zealand sides don't play games on paper. That being said, I still think England will win this series 2-1.
Jamie?
Wow, as a psychologist, I'm going to sit on the fence, but I kind of the weather sort of playing a bit of it's playing a role in my thinking. I'm thinking New Zealand possibly win the first test because of their current form. I'm then thinking there's likely to be some weather affected, maybe second or third test, but England are going to get a win at some point. So I'm going 1-1.
So we could have a draw here, Binksy.
I'd not help Binksy. I've thrown him under the bus.
I'd not taken into account the fact that apparently we can have draws in test matches. We know that that's not the case in a Brendan McCullum side. They'll get in the indoor school, even if they have to do it around a card table. Texas Hold'em, last man standing for a win in Seddon Park.
It's a good point. I am being slightly conservative, I think. Yeah.
Look, I think, Baldy already getting the, reverse Moz on England ahead of an Ashes series in a year's time. Look, I don't think England are going to play too many 3-test series without getting on a roll at some point and being able to, take a couple of sessions away from the opposition in a fashion which puts them in a position to win a game of cricket. So, I definitely think England take a test match in this series. But I think New Zealand on home soil, you guys have often talked about, Stu and Raj have often talked about expecting, New Zealand to win. You expected them to win going away to Sri Lanka. You'd expect them to win at home pretty much against all comers. So I'm going 2-1 New Zealand because I think form going into the series and the fact that, you are riding a little bit on the crest of that wave of that India series, I think it means, 2-1 to the Black Caps.
Very nice.
Am I the only one that's picked England to win this test series?
I mean, we're at the end of the pod, but I do think it's that you've come in very hot there, and quite possibly fair enough. Now that I'm going through it in my head, with England have a better top order, England have a better middle order, and England have a better bowling attack. I mean, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think, we've left it too late to unpack those questions.
I
But
don't know if I could agree with how many Test series have won in India.
we're going to have that up our sleeve now forever.
Look, that would be a relevant point, Raj, if this Test series was being played in India against India. But neither of those things are true. Your point is correct, but it's not relevant in this discussion.
See myself out.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, look, that sounds like as good a place as any to end the podcast this evening. Remarkably, with an extra voice on the podcast, we've come in under an hour for the first time in the podcast history, I believe. So that's got to be good. Jamie, thank you very much for joining and for keeping the timing on track. Probably providing the level of insight and cut through that we've been missing for the past 4 years. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us here in Auckland and also in the Northern Hemisphere, coming to you from Leicestershire and Buckinghamshire, respectively, today. We'll see you on the next couple of episodes. We will be wrapping up what looks to be an Indian victory in the first of the Border Gavaskar Test matches. And we will have also talk a little bit about the IPL auction aftermath. Did Jimmy Anderson get picked up? Did Jofra Archer's late inclusion back onto the auction list come to fruition with him getting picked up? And of course, Mahindra Singh Dhoni, will he go round again? All coming up on the next episodes of the Top Order podcast. Good night.